This is Finland, Helsinki, the capital. That's the Parliament building, the Eduskuntatalo, and you couldn't mistake it for a supermarket.
Finland's always been a bit of a phenomenon. It endured one of history's bloodiest civil wars before mastering the art of diplomatic pragmatism, and these days it's apparently the happiest place in the world to live.
I'm Andrew Mellor, I'm a journalist, and I'm a little bit obsessed with the Nordic countries. While the rest of Europe's in crisis, this region seems to be enjoying a golden age. Democracy and the arts are thriving here.
Throughout the autumn of 2024, the Philharmonia Orchestra will immerse itself in the music of this distinctive region and take a good look at how its composers respond to their surroundings, natural, social and political.
And Finland's a good place to start, partly because of the huge role Finnish musicians have played in British orchestras, not least the Philharmonia.
Finns have developed a fascinating way of defining themselves through art that often responds to nature.
When I first started coming to Finland in the noughties, I noticed this imagery and patterning from nature everywhere I looked. It was on clothes and textiles, it was even on the side of trains. And before long, I started to hear the same sort of rhythmic, figurative patterns in all sorts of Finnish music. A lot of that music was by Sibelius, Finland's best-known composer, and for many decades, a bit of a national hero here. Sibelius' music sucks you in to an enveloping world of patterning, repetition and growth.
Sibelius loved the city life here in Helsinki, perhaps a bit too much. Then, in 1904, something changed.
He moved to a new house on the edge of a tall forest overlooking a tranquil lake. And while there, Sibelius experienced something of an ecological epiphany. He became completely absorbed by the distinctive light, by the life cycle of the lake and its birds, and by the altitudinous, twisting trees. Organic elements that had always been part of Sibelius' music started to come to the fore.
That process of rethinking his connection with nature really started with Sibelius' Third Symphony. The music's characterised by this sort of seamless, almost gravitational flow of musical energies generated from small fragments.
You could think of this music as you would a river. The bottom of the orchestra is the riverbed, and as the bass line shifts, so does the rate of musical flow above, just as, when the shape of a riverbed changes, the density of the currents above change. Sibelius was particularly inspired by birds, trees and animals, but he never simply imitated or depicted them. He was far more interested in how they existed biologically in relation to the world around them. It's like he looked at their inner workings and translated them into music.
Sibelius' attachment to the topography of Finland had parallels and precursors in other Nordic countries.
In a very different looking Norway, Edvard Grieg pioneered the idea of expanse in sound, using distancing and echo effects in his music.
While Grieg imitated Norwegian folk songs, Sibelius looked to the steady, hypnotic chant of his own country's storytelling traditions. In 1891, Sibelius visited Porvoo in eastern Finland, where he heard the great rune singer Larin Paraska in action.
And you can hear the effects directly in Sibelius' violin concerto. To me, it sounds fundamentally different to other romantic violin concertos. The soloist is less telling you of their great deeds and their boundless love, and more a shamanistic figure channeling eternal stories that had always been told. In Denmark, Carl Nielsen didn't need to borrow from folk music because he was responsible for writing pretty much all the tunes everybody knew. Nielsen was a typically egalitarian Dane. He based his music on the fundamentals of the folk tradition, using simple intervals, clear melodies and strong rhythms. And you can hear all three in Nielsen's violin concerto. But it also meant Nielsen could create complex forms like symphonies using tangible, recognisable building blocks. A little bit like that other great Danish export, Lego. In Britain, we tend to think of music about nature as music that celebrates natural beauty. But in the Nordic countries, it's always been more complicated than that. Up here, nature isn't just the great inspiration, it's also the great enemy, and you can hear it in the music. Nielsen's symphonies are fraught with danger. They're full of invading forces, poisonous eruptions, and uncontained pandemics. Sibelius's great tone poems, Tapiola and the Oceanides, deal respectively with the forest and the ocean. But in the music, those entities rear up. It's as if they're turning against the listener, perhaps even against the composer.
This is the Baltic Sea. It's ensured the Nordic region's prosperity while also providing its fair share of tragedies. And now, the Baltic itself is in peril.
Overfishing, contamination and resource extraction are all leading to a potentially catastrophic decline in the Baltic Sea's wildlife. Behind me are the great icebreakers that carve their way through frozen waters. Only these days, warming seas mean there's not as much ice for them to break. Finland's folklore is famously savage. It helped instill in Finns the idea that they would prevail no matter what life, nature or geopolitics could throw at them.
Sibelius' own musical telling of the sorry tale of Kullervo reminds us that sometimes the story doesn't end well. There may be magic in Finnish folklore, but there's no delusion. You could argue that Sibelius and Nielsen anticipated the idea of a disrespected nature turning on humanity, and what they started hasn't finished. It's being taken forward right now by a new generation of composers.
Here in Finland, orchestral music still helps many hundreds of thousands of people make sense of their lives. Audiences at places like this, the Musiikitalo in Helsinki, tend to seek the newest music out, rather than avoiding it. Perhaps that's because of the more prominent role in national conversations that composers have here. And today, the conversation society's having is all about the climate crisis, and composers are fully engaged in it, sometimes in protest, sometimes using it as a creative impetus in response to the dramatic changes in landscape that are so obvious at this latitude.
That helps renew the art form. Nordic composers, arguably more than any other group from a single corner of the planet, are contributing to a magnificent reinvention of the language of the symphony orchestra.
But the picture isn't all pretty. Denmark and Norway have made billions drilling for oil in the North Sea, money that's often made its way back into the arts. Finland, Sweden and Norway have been prejudiced and patronising in their dealings with the Sami people, an indigenous European people who have a music of their own. It's Sami reindeer herders in the far northernmost reaches of those countries who know better than anyone what the climate crisis is doing.
We need to have these conversations, but to some extent, we also just need to let art be art. To recognise when someone's doing something brilliant, whatever the impetus. Thankfully, the two aren't mutually exclusive.
Art can and should prompt uncomfortable thoughts. But Carl Nielsen argued that music is life. And what he meant, surely, is that it must reflect the reality of what it is to be alive. But it meant Nielsen could also build more complex forms like symphonies using recognisable, tangible building blocks. A little bit like that other great Danish export. Lego.
Thanks.